Welcome to Issues and Answers with your host Diane Kinderwater. Issues and Answers is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. And now, Issues and Answers with your host Diane Kinderwater.
Welcome to the program. I'm Diane Kinderwater here in New Mexico. Most of us know the importance of education. We hear about it in the news almost every day that almost half of our state budget is dedicated to educating our students. We're actually giving them programs from birth to college because remember we have the lottery scholarship programs for our kids here in New Mexico. And we've also heard that in recent years, actually probably recent decades now, we have the early childhood program that begins even before kindergarten. We know the importance of education and what it means to have a successful life. But what if you're raised in a family that doesn't know that importance? What if your parents only themselves had a third grade education because they had to get out and work? What kind of work would a third grader do? Well, selling apples on the street, selling beans, whatever they could do, working in the fields. Well, that actually is a reality. Not necessarily here in New Mexico, but in Nicaragua. There are street kids, street children who don't know any better because their parents did not know any better. They didn't know that they needed an education because that's all they knew. Well, somebody made a change about that. Kathy Adams, who lives here in New Mexico, changed that for many kids in Nicaragua. We're going to talk about her journey, how she as an engineer saw poverty in Central America and decided personally to do something about it. She organized and founded and is the executive director of Empowerment International. We're going to learn about Kathy Adams' fascinating story, how she went from an engineer to a CEO for Empowerment International and why she did it. Please stay with us as we meet Kathy Adams right after this.
Hey America, now there's a place where we can join our voice, Real America's Voice. Real America's Voice is coming to a town near you with a grassroots approach, bringing the real voice of America together. Real America's Voice is growing our family of networks across the country, and soon you could be part of that change. Download the Real America's Voice app and join other Americans just like you across the country, coming together for real change.
Maybe you know people like this. I really don't. Kathy Adams, she saw a problem, a big problem, and she personally decided to do something about it. Kathy Adams, thanks so much for joining us on this program, and I believe you're just absolutely remarkable.
Thank you.
Your organization is called Empowerment International. We're going to do actually two programs with Kathy because there's so much to talk about the need, talk about what her program exactly does, but we're going to start about first, what is Empowerment International, and then begin with Kathy's journey. Who gives up an engineering degree to do all this? Maybe Kathy knows of people who do this, but I don't. But again, Kathy, what is Empowerment International?
Empowerment International is it's basically an educational program for children in Nicaragua. It actually is a little different than a lot of education programs because we are working with both the children and their parents, and it's a journey that we take them from early childhood all the way to the university. So I feel like we have co-raised many, many children now.
Co-raised many children, and you started this program when?
Unofficially in 1998.
1998, and we're going to get into your history about that, but what I liked reading online, and everybody can read online about Empowerment International, is that you're educating, again, not only the student, but their parents, because they're not like many New Mexicans we know about the importance of education. But they don't. And why don't they, Kathy?
Well, they've never had an education themselves, first of all. The average education level for our parents is about third grade. And they have spent their lives day by day trying to survive. And when you've never been exposed to education, it's hard to imagine that you can have a better life by actually trying to focus on getting your kids to school when you need your kids to actually raise some money so they can eat and you can eat and keep the lights on.
And that's still happening in Central America.
That's still happening.
And not only there, I imagine third world countries across the globe.
Yeah, it's the reality of the rest of the world, much of the rest of the world.
Still, they need to just work at a young age to be able to survive.
Right, right. And if they're not working, they're helping their parents at the home so that the parents can work. So a lot of times you'll find children taking care of their babies, cooking, looking for wood so they can cook. And everybody has a role. And so it's a great sacrifice to take a child from their role and put them into school. It's a very challenging process to get the parents and the children on board, and then to keep them on board.
Challenging. Okay, we're going to get into those challenges. It sounded like a great idea when you started it, but wow, implementing it is challenging.
Right.
Let's start about your background, Kathy. Again, you're the CEO and founder of Empowerment International. Did you ever imagine you'd be a CEO and founder of such an organization when you went to college?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. So that means maybe many of us absolutely not would think of that. It could be in our future too.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was a child, I did decide I wanted to do something to make a difference in the world. I always knew that there was a lot of poor children, and I was really well read, and I thought I would join the Peace Corps, or then I wanted to perhaps help blind children or in Africa, but then that sort of faded.
But when you were young, you read a lot, and you were
yeah.
just thinking that you could contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And why'd you think blind children first?
I must have read Helen Keller.
Okay, for sure.
I was trying on a lot of careers, and
the Peace Corps, a lot. I think many of us consider the Peace Corps.
yeah, and what happened was I did really well in school, and I ended up going. I lived with my grandmother, and she kept saying, "You're too smart to do this," or "You're too smart to do that." And she worked with engineers at Mobil Exxon, and she challenged me, even though science was my least favorite subject, to go into the science profession, and I ended up choosing engineering.
And a lot of young women at that time didn't choose the math and sciences.
Exactly, and I did well at it. I mean, I was very good at it, but I learned over the years that my heart wasn't there. And what happened was I was working at Digital Equipment Corporation, which is no longer around, and then I worked at Motorola and then Intel.
Which is still around.
It is
We're
still
glad
around.
here in New Mexico
Yeah.
they're still around.
Yeah, and I had a car accident in the 90s, and that's when everything changed for me. I remember lying in bed wondering why my boss it felt insane. She was so stressed out over data. And
Data?
Data. And I started thinking, what in the world? Why would somebody, why is this the life I want to live? Being so focused on data. And I just had like a whole shift in who I was, and I started remembering when I was
Where were you living at that time, Kathy?
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts,
Yeah.
working for Intel at that point? Or another-
Actually, that was Digital Equipment Corporation, which Intel bought out later. Not connected, but
Okay.
stuff happens.
So you were hospitalized? I mean,
No, I was actually home in bed, and I wasn't able to work for a long time. And I just started remembering my roots and what fulfilled me. And I also, when I was a teen, I worked at a nursing home. And I loved my job at the nursing home. And I realized that it was working with people that really fulfilled me. And I really, really wanted to do something, but it took me years to figure out what that was.
And you're still working as an engineer.
Yeah, yeah.
But you were thinking about that boss being so stressed out over data. Well, who isn't stressed out about things? Who isn't at work?
Exactly. But the idea, the concept for me of data, and it seemed so meaningless at the time compared to the rest of the world. And I realized that this wasn't for me.
But you still worked as an engineer for years after that?
Yeah, and so after that, I ended up continuing. I moved to Arizona, worked at Motorola, and then I moved to Intel in Arizona. And
I think that's in Chandler, Arizona.
yeah, exactly. And I just kept hurry up and waiting, as one of my spiritual teachers told me to do. And
What does that mean? Hurry up and waiting.
I couldn't figure out, just hurry up, like wait until the right thing appears,
Okay.
basically. And
But were you uneasy kind of at that time, or feeling
I
unfulfilled?
was unhappy. I was unhappy with my career. It was, I knew that I didn't want to do that. And I just kept at it, and I was very open to what was next. And then Costa Rica appeared on the radar. Intel decided they were going to put in a whole plant in Costa Rica.
I didn't know. Do they still have the plant in Costa
They
Rica?
do.
I wasn't
They do.
aware of that. Okay.
And
So there was an opportunity. You were in Arizona, Chandler, and there was an opportunity. Were they opening the plant at that time, or was it
yeah,
already?
It was brand new.
Okay.
And I started dating one of the guys they sent from Costa Rica to Intel Chandler. And he was telling me about the children on the streets. And I'll never forget this day, and we're still friends. And he told me about the kids on the street selling roses. And I said, I would do something. And he said, why don't you do something? And he said, there's just too many. And he was dropping me off at the airport.
Well, wait. When he's telling you about the children on selling roses, was he just what kind of context was that?
These are children that
No, but what was he? Why was he saying that they were selling roses? Just to
not
tell
sure.
you how poor the country was, or
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And I was very inquisitive about the country. I felt like when I ended up moving there, I already knew it. Because everybody there, I was asking a lot of questions. I started to learn the culture and the problems. And
And so when he dropped you off at the airport, or you dropped him off?
no, he dropped me off, and I was actually flying to New Mexico, which was funny. And it was just a seed. That was just a seed. And then it was about a year later that there was a job opening, and there were people going for 3 weeks. And I said, no, I want to go live there. And
So some of your coworkers actually
we're going
went,
there for like 3 weeks.
and you didn't want to just do the 3 weeks and try it out. You want to just go there.
No,
right?
I knew I needed to live there. And at the time, Intel was laying off. And one of my coworkers got laid off, and this company asked, one of our contractors asked, do you have Larry's number? We have an opening in Costa Rica, a 3-year stint, and we would like to interview him. And I said, wait a minute, I want that job. And
We're not going to tell Larry about that.
And so they were shocked, and we had to do a whole bunch of maneuvering. I went for the interview, and then they had to get permission, because there's a year-long wait you have to take before you can shift into Intel. That was just an agreement they had. So anyways, I ended up taking the job. It was a whirlwind. It was about 3-4 weeks, and they packed up my house, including the trash, put it on a slow boat to Costa Rica. And I was in Costa Rica and didn't speak Spanish. And I knew I needed to learn Spanish as one of the first things. And I was on the plane, and I knew I was going to do something. And it was in my mind that I was going to help the kids.
Even at that point,
Yeah.
even just flying over there for this job, working as an engineer, you just knew about these poor kids, never had even seen them,
Yeah.
but you thought you were going to do something to help.
Yeah,
What did you think on the plane over there that you could do to help?
I had no idea. I had no idea.
Just like the rest of us, good. You were clueless, but you knew. Okay.
And I did all the wrong things at first.
Oh, you did all the wrong things.
Yeah, and I think sometimes what happens is some people just keep doing the wrong things. And then you have a choice. You can either learn from your mistakes or not. And I also had to start realizing that sometimes I had to be tougher. Sometimes you can't let your heartstrings can get pulled in a million directions when you see poverty. And so what I learned when I was there, so basically, let me just tell you how it started. I knew I wanted to help children on the streets. My friend gave me a Christmas gift of like a donation to a children's organization, and I went to go see it, and it didn't exist. And because I thought I could volunteer there. And I tried to volunteer, and at the time, it was really hard. I wasn't finding the right fit, and then we ended up joining, a friend of mine who was Nicaraguan next door, she spoke English, and she said, I want to help. And so we went and volunteered at with an organization, and they wanted us to go out and basically just preach the Bible to child prostitutes on the streets, but they weren't doing anything. They weren't helping the girls get off the streets. And so we ended up derailing that volunteer thing, and Coco is what was her name. And I just said one day, let's do something. Let's just start something. And we were like, well, where do we start? And so we started brainstorming, and so we just started wandering the streets and talking to kids. And of course, when you see them all the time, and then when you actually try to do it was like, where are the kids? And then eventually we were going to the bank, and we saw these two kids, Michael and Jonathan, 7 and 8 years old, barefoot, dirty. And we just said hi, and they started talking, and I said, what are you doing? And they said, oh, we just got fired from our job today. And I was like, really? What were you doing? And they were dishwashers. And I said, well, would you like to go grab a bite to eat? And so we went and sat down with them, and I said, are you guys going to school? And they said, no, because, and one was like, I don't have shoes. The other said, I don't have a backpack and uniform. And so out of nowhere, I just said, well, we have a program to help kids go to school. And Coco just looked at me, and she's like, we do? I mean, she didn't say that, but she had that look. And that's literally how it started. And I said, we need to go talk to your parents. And they brought us home, and we walked this long line of poor shacks.
Poor what? Shacks?
Shacks.
Okay.
And it was what they call precario. And that's where people squat and it was a little road where people in a farm where people were squatting. And it was a long, 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 long line of shacks and a narrow, narrow path. And so we walked, the Gringa and the Nicaraguan walked all the way down this long line of shacks. At the very end is the poorest, and that's where they were from. And
the 7 and 8-year-old,
yes,
Jonathan and
Michael. And they were neighbors. They weren't brother and sister.
Gotcha.
I mean, they weren't brothers. And so we started talking to the parents, and we were going to they agreed that they would allow their kids to go to school. And so we met them the next day.
And the kids were fired anyway, so they weren't earning income at that point, no. But they were dishwashers at 7 and 8 years old, so they weren't having a job. But so you went and talked to the parents about the importance and how your organization would help them.
Right.
Okay, so the parents agreed, I'll let Jonathan, I'll let Michael go to school.
Yeah. And they said, could you put our other kids in school too? And so we put 8 children into school.
Now these are public, this was still in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And they were public schools, but which were free. I mean, I think there are a lot of religious schools.
They're free.
Oh.
There's
public education.
Yeah, there's a problem with I don't know Costa Rica now, to be honest. It's been years since I've lived there. But back then, you had to have uniforms. You had to have school supplies. There were fees you had to pay that were not part of the public education system. But those teachers would ask for, say, so many Cordovas. I'm sorry, I actually forgot the currency, colones. They would ask for so many colones and for this project or that project. And so the kids didn't have that, and they felt really bad if they didn't have that. And if you didn't have a uniform that matched, that was nice, they felt bad. Because the idea with uniforms is that you're all the same, but that doesn't always work. And
especially if you can't afford even a uniform, then you're not the same.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, but the problem that year, and this was where we failed miserably with these 8 kids, was we listened to them, all their stories, all the sob stories, and all of the problems their parents had. And we started helping them with everything. And this was my money. And
your own personal money, your earnings as being an engineer.
Yeah. And so it wasn't just the school supplies. We started helping them with food. We started helping them with the baby that was sick. And then we started helping them, they needed some bread that day, then they needed, like this medicine and this. And in the end, and we bought the kids nice clothes and we did way too much. And I didn't know that would be a bad thing at the time. And I learned how fast you can spoil like really nice kids.
Wait, what?
And I've learned this several times of my life over the years. If you give kids too much too soon, they can become brats, and they will rebel, and they want more and more. And basically, the kids they all ended up dropping out of school. They didn't value school, and the parents didn't either. And basically, that first year was sort of a failure, except that we learned from that. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, we were planting seeds in the whole neighborhood. And there would be kids coming up to us and watching. They'd be looking through the windows, and I'd talk to them, and I'd say, so why aren't you in school? And and then they'd tell me, I'm in school now. And I was like, that's fantastic. And I started giving them all this encouragement. And the next year, I said, all right, I'm going to do this differently. And I had some friends help me out. We made these applications, just informal applications. We went down the houses and interviewed parents, and asked them, evaluated their financial situation and their interest in going to school, and then what was the actual obstacle, physical, material obstacle. So one family, it might have been shoes. The other one, it might have been a backpack, or one kid and then the other kid. So we took on 13, I think it was 13 households. I can't remember now the numbers.
Sure.
And started over. And then I started visiting them in my spare time. I was a field service engineer, so once my machines were installed, I had plenty of time. I was on 24/7 call. And so I would visit them, and they'd show me their report cards and their schoolwork, and I'd review them. And I never knew how important this was until years later. That was the key. It wasn't the material. It was the encouragement. It was sitting down with the families. And
the time spent. Well, you spent time getting them the material things,
right.
But the time, the encouragement, and the appreciation of the education.
And then working through the obstacles, like the parents would say, oh, but I find out one, like Johnny wasn't in school or something, and it was like, why? And he said, because his shoes ripped. I was like, well, how about we take them to the shoemaker? And so we started working through these little barriers. Or, we don't have, he needs to go collect wood. Well, can't he collect wood at night instead of in the morning? And it was just little tiny things that seem, that we wouldn't even think about.
Because we would perhaps know to do it.
Right.
And they didn't know. Okay.
And
so the second year of 3 years in Costa Rica, you knew the encouragement was the key. You knew helping them.
Well, I didn't. I just started doing it. Oh. I had no idea that was.
But finding the little, overcoming the little obstacle, the obstacles.
And again, I wasn't still considering this a real nonprofit. It was just my little pet project. And my friend Coco, who was Nicaraguan, she had to leave that year. Her sister died from cancer, and she had to go back to Nicaragua and take care of the children. And so all of a sudden I was left on my own, and my Spanish was terrible. And the children were translating to the parents for me. As I started, then I was forced to actually really speak Spanish.
But they knew some English?
No, they just understood my bad Spanish.
Okay.
And so it just really, and they understood my accent better than their parents.
Sure. Okay.
And so eventually I got better and better with Spanish, and I started doing this completely on my own. And every year we would add more kids. And after my three-year stint, I had to go back to the U.S. shortly after. And I had one of my friends from Intel, Alex, he started helping with one of the moms monitor the program and check on them. And every year I'd go back with school supplies. And
But who was running the program when you left?
Alex and
Oh,
the
he's-
mother were
okay.
sort of running it.
So we're running. This is so interesting. Quite a journey. We just have a couple of minutes in this show. We're going to talk more about your empowerment international, how the program works. So you were back in the United States. Alex and Mom were still continuing the program that you started.
Yeah. And then Alex and I one day, I said to Alex, I've always wanted to go to Nicaragua since these kids are from Nicaragua. There's more poverty there. And so we decided to go and see what the situation was there. And that's where we ended up moving our program to eventually. And that's how we landed in Nicaragua.
Did you go back? Did Intel offer you a position then in Nicaragua?
No, there was no Intel there.
Of course, no
And
Intel
so-
there, but you just decided, well, Coco was there.
No, yeah, Coco at that point had gone to the United States. And so she wasn't even there anymore. And so we ended up searching all over the place for the right place, including where Coco was from. And it didn't feel right. They were used to handouts versus hand-ups. And
They
then
were used to handouts rather than hand-ups.
Yeah,
How
and
could
we-
you tell that right away that they wouldn't accept a hand-up?
because they had this mentality of we're receiving money from the states, and there was nobody working, there wasn't a sense of trying in that one community because they were used to the family sending money. And it just didn't feel right. And then we got to Granada and we just landed there and walked out the door. We were exhausted and we taken showers and we started walking down the street and there was a children's organization there, Casa de Niñez. And we walked in and said, what is this? And basically they are an organization, or they're no longer there, that helps street children. And I said, how about we help kids that aren't on the streets? Could you show us where these kids are from? And maybe we'll take the other ones.
Okay. We're going to talk more, continue your journey of the kids who weren't on the street in Granada, Nicaragua in our next show. But we talked with Kathy Adams with Empowerment International. Very interesting. You're planting a seed maybe for all of us. We'll be back with Kathy at another show, but thanks for watching this show. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
The New Mexico Modern Child Support Family Program works to benefit both parents for the purpose of improving children's lives. It provides the basics of child support, but goes further by helping parents step up to find better job opportunities that get them back on track to paying their monthly child support obligation. Find out how the Child Support Step Up program can help your modern family. Contact New Mexico Child Support today to learn more.
Issues and Answers with your host Diane Kinnewater is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. To comment on today's program or to purchase a copy of any Issues and Answers program, visit sunbroadcasting.org or call us at 505-345-1991.